problems and challenges from federal law. Whether we're fighting fentanyl epidemics, whether we're fighting those who would undermine this country, and many who would cheat and steal at the expense of others, we count on professional prosecutors to make those decisions. We go through a process here where a president will name a potential U.S. attorney. That's not the end of the story. The attorney's name is then submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I chair, and then it goes through a rigorous bipartisan process, an investigation of each one of these nominees. Until they clear both sides of the table, Democrats and Republicans, the nominees don't move. Once having cleared, they are then put up for approval before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Traditionally, that was virtually the end of the story. The name would hit the calendar name would be called, approved, and the person would move into action. Under the previous president, Donald Trump, there was a lot of controversy, political controversy associated with all sorts of issues. So you have to wonder, out of the 85 U.S. attorney nominees proposed by President Donald Trump, how many of them ran into an obstacle or being stopped on the Senate floor by Democrats for partisan reason? The answer, none, not one. Despite all the controversy of the Trump administration, the feeling was that it was only fair to these men and women asking to serve our nation as representatives of the Department of Justice to give them that chance if they cleared the bipartisan background process. They did, we gave our approval, they served across the nation. But unfortunately, we've come into a new era. U.S. attorneys, law enforcement officers who lead our nation to prosecute violent criminals and protect our communities from drug traffickers, gun violence, terrorism, and so many other things, are still central to our system of justice. I've emphasized that the U.S. attorney's offices in the Northern District of Ohio, that would be Cleveland, and the Northern District of Illinois, that would be Chicago, undertake important investigations and prosecutions that keep our communities safe. The state of Ohio, like many others, suffers from a scourge of fentanyl trafficking. We know about this deadly narcotic. It's a killer. It is a fourth in the nation for drug overdose deaths. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio oversees the area's response to fatal overdoses from fentanyl through the U.S. Attorney's Heroin and Opioid Task Force. I would guess many Ohioans would want to know why that task force now is waiting for Senate-confirmed leadership. In my home state of Illinois, over the last 2 years, the Chicago Police Department has recovered more than 10,000 firearms, 10,000 a year from various criminal investigations. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois is responsible for coordinating the efforts with all the law enforcement agencies in the Chicago Firearms Trafficking Strike Force. My constituents can't understand why one senator from another state is blocking the confirmation of one U.S. Attorney candidate in Illinois, April Perry, who's been found to be highly qualified not only by the White House, but by a bipartisan investigative committee of the Senate Judiciary Committee. April Perry is well qualified for this job. She would like to be on the job and should have been weeks ago, making it safer to live in my state. Another point I've made before is the irony that the senator who is blocking these two nominees is considering this a tough-on-crime position. Tough on crime, when you refuse to put a person in the role of prosecutor who's supposed to put these criminals behind bars. When he ran for the Senate, my colleague from Ohio pledged to, quote, fight the criminals, not the cops. That's his quote. He argued that Americans will not be safe if, quote, politicians keep attacking police officers instead of violent criminals. I just have to tell him his strategy of stopping two leading U.S. attorneys, one in his state and the state of Illinois, is the best news the criminals have had in a long time. The same man who pledged to fight the cops now proudly brags that he wants to, quote, grind the Department of Justice to a halt. I'm not making that up, and he's not denied it. He said his goal is to grind the U.S. Department of Justice to a halt. Listen to this headline from a recent article in Newsmax, quote, Senator Vance to Newsmax, blocking DOJ nominees makes AG's job harder. We want to make the Attorney General's job harder when it comes to prosecuting drug criminals. Is that what this is all about? I've said it before and say it again. Senator Vance needs to read a resolution he proposed in this body earlier this year and take his own advice. He should give law enforcement officers the support and resources they need rather than trying to score political points by making their jobs harder. Unlike me, Senator Vance doesn't need to worry about sounding like a broken record. Each time I come to the floor to ask for unanimous consent, he offers a different explanation for why he's blocking the confirmation of these highly qualified nominees. First, he claimed he was punishing the Justice Department for what he falsely called, quote, unprecedented political prosecution of former President Trump. As I pointed out, this is a weak excuse for hamstringing law enforcement, considering the former president has now been indicted 4 separate times on 91 different counts and continues to threaten judges, prosecutors, jurors, and witnesses. Senator Vance also previously stated here on the Senate floor, quote, and I quote, it's in the congressional record, my objection is not specific to the qualifications of the particular individuals that have been nominated. He said, I want to make it clear that this, in reference to both Ms. Lutzko in Ohio and Ms. Perry in Illinois. In response, I offered the junior senator from Ohio the opportunity to keep his promise to support law enforcement by allowing us to schedule confirmation votes on these pending U.S. attorneys, exactly what he said he wanted on the record in the Senate. He looked me in the eye and agreed with me. He released his objection to both Ms. Lutzko and Ms. Perry on the condition that we hold roll call votes on them, which I agreed to. And then, seemingly overnight, he decided that he actually does object to even holding confirmation votes on these nominees. He then claimed that, quote, expecting us to vote on cloture is not too much to ask. I was surprised to hear that. It was a new wrinkle in his argument, considering that just last month, the junior senator from Ohio was on the Senate floor attempting to force the Senate to skip a cloture vote on one of his bills. I look forward to hearing what his new argument may be today. If he is trying to punish those who are in the process of prosecuting a former president of the United States, what is his retribution when it comes to the state of Georgia? We now have so many counts naming the former president for wrongdoing, and we have 4 of the people who've been accused who have pled guilty so far in that process. Does he have a special agenda now when it comes to the state of Georgia to determine whether or not there's going to be some retribution, going to grind to halt the system of justice in that state? So we've reached a point where it's hard to explain. Senator Tuberville of Alabama is stopping military promotions of deserving women and men who have risked their lives in service to America. Another Republican senator is stopping ambassadorial positions being filled. And now this senator has decided we have enough criminal prosecutors in America to take care of crime, we don't need more. Well, we certainly need these 2 and many more doing a professional job. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with the Republican leader, the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, calendar number 314 and 315. There'll be 2 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form on each nomination, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. The motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President, with respect to my colleague from Illinois. I've heard a number of arguments that I've somehow changed my tune. And what I would say is I haven't changed my tune. The senator from Illinois keeps making different arguments, and I keep needing to respond to each one of them. But to restate my fundamental problem here, I will note that one of the consistent criticisms of my hold on Department of Justice nominees is that this is unprecedented, that when Donald Trump was president, we let these nominees sail through, and now I'm holding up these nominations to the Department of Justice. I would counter that what is unprecedented is not the hold policy, but the Department of Justice attempting to throw its political opponents in jail. Now, much is made about the political prosecution of Donald Trump. I think that is unjustified, and it is frankly scary in the world's greatest democracy to have the political opposition leader prosecuted by the sitting president. That's pretty weird. Not something that happens a whole lot in the United States of America, and thank God for that. But you don't even need to make it about the current president. You can run down any number of everyday conservatives, people who have been prosecuted, investigated, harassed by this Department of Justice. It should be enforcing the law. It should leave the politics to this chamber and to the electoral process. Mr. President, I will continue to object so long as the Department of Justice conducts its business in a highly politicized way. If Merrick Garland or anyone else is listening, please get back to the business of enforcing the law, get out of politics, and then, and only then, will I release my hold policy. Because of that, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Last week, in my home area of Chicago, a 6-year-old Palestinian boy answered the door and was stabbed over and over again until he died. And then the assailant went into another room and tried to kill his mother. The question is whether is this a hate crime because of his Palestinian origin? Does it deserve an investigation? Does it sound in America like this is the sort of thing we want an answer to? Who would we turn to for that investigation? The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois. But the senator from Ohio, because of his hurt feelings over the indictment of former President Trump by many others, has decided to say, in my region of the country, we will have no U.S. attorney. We'll leave the position vacant. Not because the person isn't qualified to take it over, but because he is hurt and believes he wants to protest over the idea of holding a former president accountable. Obviously, in his mind, former presidents are above the law, not in mine, and not in any democracy. I don't know if former President Trump is guilty of any charges. We have a system of laws and law enforcement to reach that conclusion. But in the meantime, whether it's a hate crime in a suburb of Chicago or drug crimes that are claiming lives every single night in every single neighborhood in our nation, how can we stand here in good conscience and say we want to grind the Department of Justice to a halt? That is exactly what he said over and over again. Grind the Department of Justice to a halt. To prove what? To prove what about this nation? We deserve the opportunity to be protected by the agencies of government we've appointed. And the men and women who are willing to sacrifice their time, their skills to serve that purpose and keep us safer deserve better treatment than what's happening on the Senate floor. I wish I could say this is a unique experience. It has become a pattern. A House of Representatives which goes for 21, 22 days trying to find a leader on the Republican side of the aisle. Military appointments, hundreds of them, of men and women qualified, serving our military, risking their lives, whose nominations are being held up on the Senate floor by one Republican senator. The idea that we're holding back the possibility of appointing ambassadors in parts of the world where war is imminent and underway and could drag the United States into conflict if we're not careful. To take that position that we want to stop government, whether it's in the Department of Defense, in their promotion policy, whether it's in the Department of State, in the representatives around the world, or whether it's in the Department of Justice, is shameful. This is not public service. This is a political errand. I wish it would come to an end soon, and I wish the senator, who is new to this body, would think twice about whether this is how he wants to write his record in the United States Senate. I yield the floor.